Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar about the new Protect Our Coast Drive Electric campaign. My name is Chris Carnevale, and I'm the Coastal Climate and Energy Manager for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with SACE, we're a regional membership organization that promotes responsible energy choices to ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. We'd like to acknowledge our members on this call and encourage those of you who are not members to please join us today. For ways in which you can become a member and get involved, please visit our website, cleanenergy.org. Now, I'd like to take a moment to review the basic functions of the Zoom platform on the bottom of your screen. To ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout this presentation. If you're having trouble hearing or seeing the slides, click the chat button and type in your problem so we can help you troubleshoot. We've also saved time at the end of the presentation to answer questions and have a discussion. To ask a question, click the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen, and we'll work to get to as many questions as we can after the presentation. Lastly, we're recording this webinar and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. Today, you will be hearing from myself, Dory Larson, Electric Vehicle Program Coordinator for SACE, and Deirdre McNabb, former president of the League of Women Voters of Florida. Next slide, please. And here's an outline of what we'll be covering today. First, offshore drilling threatens our coast. Secondly, electric vehicles can replace offshore drilling. Third, local governments can accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. Fourth, we'll cover our local policy toolkit. Fifth, we'll talk about how you can help. And sixth, we'll have Q&A and discussion. Next slide, please. So starting with kind of the background of why we are undertaking this campaign. This campaign, Protect Our Coast Drive Electric, is informed by the fact that offshore drilling threatens the economy, our environment, and public health. The risks are from the big spills like the Deepwater Horizon disaster, but also smaller ongoing impacts that aren't as well known. Starting with the big spills, while they're not frequent, when they do occur, they can be catastrophic. The Deepwater Horizon disaster killed 11 people and oiled over 1,000 miles of coastline from Texas to Florida. Livelihoods were jeopardized and even lost, especially for tourism-based businesses like hotels, restaurants, and tour companies, and fisheries suffered from declined catch rates. Many of the tourism and seafood industries reliant on the Gulf of Mexico eventually recovered from the Deepwater Horizon tragedy within a couple years, but for many small business owners, just one bad season can make the difference between staying in business or not. And while catastrophic spills may occur infrequently, the industrialization of the coast that accompanies offshore development, such as pipelines and refineries, blights the coast and deters tourism, even if such a big spill were to never occur. Analysis shows that coastal counties on the Gulf Coast without such infrastructure, like pipelines and refineries, generate twice as much tourism revenue per capita as counties that do have such infrastructure. Furthermore, thousands of smaller spills, which amount to millions of gallons of oil every year, occur in the Gulf of Mexico. Given the challenging environment offshore, spills can be difficult to fix and might last a long time, such as the ongoing spill from the Taylor Energy platform, which has slowly released hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into the Gulf since 2004. Perhaps worse than the direct economic damage that a major oil spill can cause is the harm to the health of nearby residents and workers. For example, during the cleanup of the Deepwater Horizon blowout, you can see it in the picture on the slide here, more than 50,000 cleanup workers were exposed to hazardous chemicals on a daily basis, resulting in chronic debilitating conditions and possibly increased risks of cancer and other life-threatening diseases. Additionally, many Gulf residents suffered considerable mental health degradation with sharp increases in anxiety and clinical depression, largely related to the loss of income from the spill. Next slide, please. Yet, in spite of the terrible risks of offshore drilling, even with such meager potential benefits, the Trump administration is currently moving to expand offshore drilling to about 90% of our nation's ocean acreage, including off of the entire Atlantic coast and the eastern Gulf Coast. Next slide, please. So in the face of this reckless expansion plan, we at SACE took a look at how many electric vehicles would it take to offset any gasoline that could be potentially produced by opening these new areas to offshore drilling. And we found that it would take about 20 to 45 million electric vehicles on the road by the early 2030s, which would offset 100% of the gasoline that might feasibly be produced from the Atlantic, the Eastern Gulf, and the Pacific combined. Again, that's 20 to 45 million EVs on the road. While that sounds like a large number, it's actually very achievable, but it will require good policy and consumer education. To put this number in perspective, EVs would need to comprise about 7 to 16% of new vehicle sales from 2018 to 2035. Again, the number was 20 to 45 million EVs. To illustrate how feasible that could be, consider that a recent AAA poll found that 50 million Americans said that they are likely to go electric for their next vehicle. So this benchmark is feasible. It's reachable. It's not a given, which is why we need to make sure we put forth good policies and consumers are educated to accelerate this transition. Next slide, please. In addition to protecting our coast from the perceived need, it's not a real need, but it is a perceived need to expand offshore drilling. Some of the other benefits of EVs include that they save money because they use electricity instead of gasoline. Fueling them costs the equivalent of about $1 per gallon. They have way fewer parts that need regular replacement, so they require much less maintenance. Overall, an electric vehicle will save a typical family about $10,000 over 10 years of ownership. So they save a lot of money. EVs don't burn gasoline and they don't use motor oil, so you can save time by eliminating trips to the gas station and to get your oil changed. Instead, you can conveniently charge right at home. And also, EVs protect public health and the environment. They don't produce any tailpipe emissions, meaning they improve local air quality compared to gas cars, and they don't contribute to diseases such as asthma, lung cancer, and heart disease like tailpipe pollution from gas cars do. Even though the electric system isn't 100% renewable, EVs are still much cleaner than gas cars. In Florida, EVs get the equivalent of about 57 miles per gallon when you incorporate the pollution from power plants. Of course, if you have solar on your roof, then there's no pollution. And as the grid gets cleaner over time, which it is projected to do, then your EV actually gets cleaner, which is something you definitely cannot say about a gas car. Next slide, please. Local governments have been at the forefront of fighting the expansion of offshore drilling on the Atlantic and Eastern Gulf coasts. More than 250 local governments have passed resolutions or otherwise registered official opposition to offshore drilling expansion. Similarly, we need local governments that have already demonstrated their passion for protecting our surrounding waters to take the next step and help accelerate the transition to clean electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So we're launching a new campaign called the Protect Our Coast, Drive Electric campaign to partner with local governments around Florida to advance policies that will proactively accelerate our transition to clean transportation, reduce oil demand, mitigate climate change pollution, and help ensure our coasts are not threatened by offshore drilling and the effects of climate change. The goal is that local governments will accelerate the transition to electric vehicles through adopting targeted policies, and the outcomes we hope to achieve through the campaign are no new offshore drilling in the Atlantic and Eastern Gulf of Mexico, a cleaner environment, protection of our coastal economy, better public health, and equitable access to the benefits provided by electric vehicles. Next slide, please. The logos you see on the screen now, these are the current partners in the campaign, but a big reason for this webinar is that we're hoping to recruit more partner organizations and individual activists to help advance pro-EV policies in the communities they're involved with. So if you're interested in helping in your local community or getting your organization joined on as an official partner, please contact us at the email addresses shown here. Dory and I will be handling the initial outreach to elected officials in target cities, and after that initial outreach, we would appreciate help with getting constituents to in-person meetings with the elected officials and showing support in the community by writing letters and making phone calls to support the policies. So that kind of covers the overview of the campaign and the background on why we are launching it. And next, to talk more about the specifics of the policies that we will be advocating for with local governments, I'm going to turn it over to Dory Larson.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great lead up as to why we have the toolkit. And so I'm going to walk you through the policy guide itself. So it's a comprehensive suite of policy options that a city or county could enact. So we're calling it our toolkit, our policy toolkit. And the toolkit contains specific policies that can be enacted at the local level to facilitate the transition to electric transportation. So it's not to suggest that all of the policy recommendations need to be enacted, but rather decision makers can use the toolkit as a menu of options to best fit the needs for their community. So you can find the toolkit on the website, and when you look on the top bar, there is a toolkit button. So it's broken down into 8 major categories that we've chosen to present. And the reason we chose to present the material electronically is because it's very in-depth, and it allows decision makers to go through it at their leisure and make it easier to digest. But in addition, we also have included a downloadable PDF on the website. So if somebody does want to take a look at it and read it in paper form, it's available that way as well. So the first tool in our toolkit is to create an overarching electrification plan and a roadmap for the community. So the plan can incorporate different elements from each of the categories. And we also recommend to the municipalities that we speak with looking at federal and state funding to help reduce the costs, and also to engage with their local utility, as utilities often have plans and certainly have expertise on how to make the transition the most cost effective. We also provide in each of the categories examples. So for the roadmap, creating a plan, we've highlighted the cities of Atlanta, Portland, and Seattle that have already developed an overarching transportation plan for electrification. So the second toolkit, a tool in our toolkit, is to establish fleet goals. This is where we give ways to develop, we give examples on how to develop specific goals. So one of those ways could be to develop an actual acquisition goal, whether that be a percentage of the fleet or a specific number of vehicles by a set date. We also share leasing options in order to gain access to the federal tax credit. So a lot of municipalities aren't aware that they can tap into those federal tax credits. We also like to provide resolutions so that the language is already written and the work is done for communities to take action. And we also recommend the Climate Mayor's Purchasing Collaborative. The third tool in our toolkit is to promote EV charging access and infrastructure. So some examples in this bucket are looking at EV-ready building codes. So a city's permit for new construction, those sites should be being built EV-ready, meaning that the wiring to accept an EV charging station is being built in. So it's not requiring that the charging station itself be installed, but the ability to connect. And one reason that policy is so important is that it's a lot cheaper to install pre-construction versus after a project is completed or trying to do a retrofit. So other policy actions that we suggest are trying to increase. Other ways to increase charging station infrastructure is to streamline the permitting process. Another policy option that we recommend is looking at workplace charging for both city employees and also encouraging businesses in their community to install workplace charging as an amenity for their employees. And these are just a few of the actions that we have in the toolkit. So I would encourage you to look through the website to get a complete list of all of the policy recommendations in this category, because it is very extensive. So the fourth tool or category in the toolkit is education and outreach. Cities and counties can have a big impact in helping to educate their community members by adding information about driving electric on their website. And they can also host events, whether that be presentations or ride and drive events in their community. And I also wanted to highlight that SACE is launching our own Driving on Sunshine Roadshow, where we will be taking EVs on the road so that people can experience driving electric and make that personal connection with driving electric firsthand. And we are happy to partner with cities who would like to host an event with us. So that's something that we're happy to be able to offer. The fifth tool in our toolkit is incentivizing electric driving. And we are acutely aware that we are living in the Southeast US. So incentivizing electric driving means something very different than in other parts of the country where they're really aggressively promoting electric transportation. So we aren't proposing aggressive rebates like in other parts of the country. What we're talking about with local communities is looking at parking incentives, whether that be free or reduced parking. Another option would be to reduce or waive permitting fees for installing EV charging stations. And again, there are other policies. I'm just highlighting a few as we go through today's webinar. So please check those other options out on the website. The sixth tool in the toolkit is to establish public transit goals. So local transit authorities are made up of local members of local cities, local elected officials. And those local elected officials need to be aware of the EV public transportation options. So we like to educate them about how they can save between $300,000 and $350,000 per electric bus over their lifetime. We also encourage cities to build relationships with transportation network communities like Uber and Lyft. And that's because as they are increasing and there are more cars participating in them on the roads, it's also increasing greenhouse gas emissions. We also encourage and include a section on electric school buses because they, like transit buses, are cheaper to own if you consider the total cost of ownership, about $50,000 cheaper by the end of their lifetime, and they have no toxic tailpipe gases for our kids to be exposed to. And finally, we highlight educating elected officials about the opportunities for public-private partnerships with these electric shuttle transportation companies that are cropping up. They have a lot of creative electric solutions to address last mile and transportation goals. So Freebie is one example of one of those electric shuttle services. The seventh bucket in our toolkit is expanding equity and access. So frontline communities are those facing the worst impacts from climate change, and they typically experience disproportionately negative impacts from pollution caused by the transportation sector. And they also experience stronger barriers to electric transportation due to the higher upfront costs and lack of access to charging infrastructure. So it's important when we're creating, or when cities are creating a roadmap for electrification, that frontline communities are being prioritized. One policy action to address this is vouchers for income qualified drivers that apply to used EVs. They've had some success with that out west. And then another is making sure that outreach is being done in frontline communities. And then our final tool in the toolkit is working with local utilities. So this may seem obvious, but they are essential partners in looking at the most cost-effective way to site charging station locations. And another way that communities can engage with their local utility is to ask them to roll out a charging station pilot, similar to what Duke Energy has done. So I also want to highlight some caveats with the policy guide, and that is that this is a living document, and it will change as we iterate and learn more. And as this emerging technology is changing, we certainly need to be flexible and be able to change policy recommendations. And I also wanted to stress again that we're not asking communities take action on every single one of the policy recommendations that we offer. Rather, they use it as a menu of options to select the best needs for their communities. So what can you do to help? So now that you're a little more familiar with the Protect Our Coast Drive Electric campaign, we would love it if you would spread the word about the initiative via sharing the website and also the blog that we put out, kind of announcing the creation of the program. The second thing that you could do would be to contact Chris or I to work out a game plan for your community. So like Chris mentioned, SACE is going to be doing the initial contacts with elected officials. And once we've met with them and made contact with them, we would invite you to collaborate with us on creating a public support plan and engaging with your elected officials in that way. So some talking points that we wanted to share with you about this program is that offshore drilling threatens our economy, our environment, and our public health, and it should be phased out and not expanded. Second, electric vehicles can replace new offshore drilling, and local governments can lead the charge in accelerating clean electric transportation to protect our coast. The third main point is that EVs save money, protect public health, and reduce carbon pollution. And then the fourth is that local governments should create an electric vehicle action plan to realize EV's many benefits. So I'm going to hand it over to Deirdre McNabb, former president of the League of Women Voters of Florida, who will highlight the importance of volunteers who are heroes in getting this work over the finish line.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the call this afternoon. And I can't look you in the eyes, but I would like to ask each of you, why are you on this call today? And I suspect the reason for each of you is that you are deeply, deeply concerned, not just about our coastline, but about the integrity of the whole coastal southeastern United States. And Florida, of course, is on the front lines. It's a sandbar that came out of the ocean about 60,000 years ago, and for sure will be the first part of the US to go back in. So we have our work cut out for you and cut out for us. We know that we can't count on Washington to help us in the near future. So the responsibility and the opportunity is really on our local governments. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, once said, "Never doubt for a moment that one person can change the world, because in fact, it's the only thing that ever has." Now, many of us don't wake up in the morning and say to themselves, "I want to change the world." But the fact is that our opportunity to leave our mark on history and to make this planet and world and civilization a better place does rest on us. And for those of you on the call, you've taken the initiative today to spend an hour of your time learning more about this issue. So I'm going to just share a couple of true life hero stories, because I think those of you on the call today are actually sitting on your superhero cape. And then I'm going to share some suggestions that I have after running the League of Women Voters for 6 years in Florida that make effective activists. I don't know how, I don't know what age range we have, men, women, but whether you're 12 years old or 104, history is full of famous people who have stepped forward. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, one of my favorite stories, she got active at the age of 74 when she was in the grocery store and she was talking to someone who was working to save the Everglades. And as you know, she wrote the famous book, River of Grass. And so the woman asked her that she bumped into, "Marjorie, what are you doing these days?" Marjorie said, "Well, I wrote the book." And the woman said, "Marjorie, we need you now more than ever to save the Everglades. We need you to give speeches. We need you to write editorials. We need you to lobby the legislature." And at the age of 74, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas worked as Florida's and really one of the world's foremost environmental activists. She died at the age of 104 still lobbying the legislature with her sup hose, her hat, her sunglasses, and her cane. So it's never too late to make your difference. 24-year-old Harry T. Byrne cast the deciding vote as a Tennessee legislator for American women to finally get the vote after 100 years of struggle. So whether you're 24, whether you're 12, whether you're 104, history is waiting for you. So what is it that you can do? I would suggest strongly, and today's webinar is a very important first step, is to get informed. We recommend that you take the NextCar Pledge, which is online, nextcarpledge.org. And Dory, who you just heard from, compiles articles from all around the world every week and sends them out in an email. And that is a really good way to get breaking news on new cars that are coming out, new technologies, new challenges, and new breakthroughs. And then you can share those on Facebook and Twitter and send them to your elected officials. So get informed. That's number one. Number two is build relationships. One of the most important ways that we can be effective in changing things in our community is getting to know our elected officials. So go in with a one-page flyer that Dory has either already sent you or will send you, and sit down with your city or your county commissioners one-on-one and chat with them about their ideas. I always like to start with what are your ideas, Commissioner, for improving our air quality and getting us into the 21st century of clean energy, and then share your suggestions, which will be provided to you by email from Dory and from Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. So number one is get informed. Number two is build relationships, because once they know you, they are much more likely to take your suggestions. Secondly, once you've had a chance to meet with your commissioners, go to the meetings and sign up. Pretty much every public meeting today has public input, usually at the beginning. Take your 3 minutes, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 minutes, and stand up and say, my name is Deirdre McNabb, and I live in this community, and I feel so strongly that we must not miss the opportunity to be part of this exciting new clean energy economy, electrifying our transportation. And these are some of the things that I hope you'll do. And I want to encourage staff and commissioners to not be the last one on the block, to add jobs to our community, help our citizens get savings, and improve our quality of life through cleaner air and quieter streets. So thirdly, I would suggest that you engage everybody you talk to when you go to your bridge circle, your book group, your PTA meeting, when you carpool. Turn to the person next to you, doesn't matter what age they are, and say, have you thought about what your next car is going to be? Do you think you would buy an electric car? Are you using transit? These are the questions that you can provoke thinking and encourage them to take the NextCar Pledge, which is nextcarpledge.org. So through your one-on-one daily conversations and through getting together with 2 or 3 friends and going to city and county commissions, you can begin to move the needle of history in such an important way. And we all need to do this all across Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina. We need to get the Southeast back in the saddle again, leading the country on clean energy. I'm sure I'm like you, how much inspiration I am taking right now from our younger population. You see young people around the world, they're taking a day off from school to protest the lack of movement on climate change, particularly in the United States, but we see it in Europe and across the world. We have to step forward as adults, and we have to urge our fellow adults and certainly encourage and engage with our younger future leaders about really beginning to move the needle quickly and decisively and innovatively forward, so that we can be proud of the direction, the speed, and the transition to a clean energy, sustainable world. So folks, I urge you to step forward. You've already done it by being on this webinar this morning. And sign up for the next our pledge. Continue to stay informed and make sure your elected officials and your fellow citizens are constantly thinking about ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint and save this world that we love and need so desperately much. Thank you all for being on today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Deirdre.
I think it's time for.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Deirdre. That was very, very inspiring. Yeah, we'll do Q&A now. So again, as a reminder, you should have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can click, and we have to do it all typed to preserve audio quality, because inevitably somebody will give us hold music or there'll be some terrible echo or something. So just type in your questions as you have them. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And I want to reiterate that we would love to have your support in helping get through to the elected officials in this campaign. As I mentioned, Dory and I are going to be doing the what we would ask you to do actually is get in touch with us, and let's make a plan for your community so that we can reach out to the elected officials in a coordinated way. Dory and I are going to be doing the initial outreach to the elected officials, but we want to talk with folks in local communities to come up with a public support plan that makes sense for that community. So actually, if you get in touch with us, we have a volunteer toolkit, which has a template letter to go to the mayor. It has a fact sheet. It has a welcome letter for you and talking points and stuff like that. So get in touch with us at the email addresses on the screen, and let's chat about how we can come up with a plan for your community. And we definitely want to touch base with you before getting letters and phone calls into the elected officials so we can do it in a coordinated way. And yeah, I think so. With that, let's get to the Q&A. So let's see. I see from Simon, has there been any outreach to wildlife organizations such as Ducks and Trout Unlimited? Not that I know of. That's a good idea. And let's plan on doing that because they have large membership that is spread around the state. Thank you for that idea, Simon. Also, would it be worth it to have the government of Bahamas sign on to a letter of support for the program? Letters of support definitely could not hurt. That is not a focus area that we're focusing on right now. This campaign is focused on Florida, but I mean, a support letter. Let's probe that and let's talk about that because that seems cool to have a support letter from the Bahamas. Okay, let's see. Moving on. Susan asks, has SACE partnered with Sierra Club and Climate Reality Project at the state level on this campaign, as they each have 100% renewable energy campaigns? Dory, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So we've recently been contacted by Sierra Club, and we would be happy to partner with them on this campaign because, like, to your point, Susan, there's a lot of overlap where there's engaged citizens who are working already on the 100% renewable energy campaign. So these would dovetail together nicely. Yes.
Great. And Linda, you asked about the Sierra Club also. I'm going to mark your question as answered. Dory, this question is from Thomas. How can we get Toyota, Kia, Hyundai, etc. to distribute EVs in the South? We cannot buy EVs available in their states.
Right. So that goes to Florida is not a ZEV or zero emission vehicle state, and manufacturers have quotas that they have to sell a certain number of EVs or buy credits from a company like Tesla who sells all electric vehicles. Because Florida is not a ZEV state, some of the companies choose not to sell directly in Florida. And I think that part of this initiative is getting community, cities, municipalities to commit to purchasing numbers of EVs. And if we can demonstrate to manufacturers that there's a market and business to be done in Florida, if they would bring their vehicles here, I think that would help to address that.
Dory, is there also, do you know if the Mayor's Purchasing Collaborative has access to some of those cars that aren't like available maybe via retail or something?
That would be a question for them. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, as Dory mentioned, one of the kind of solutions that we're promoting to local governments is that they can join the Mayor's Purchasing Collaborative, which is run through the, Dory, is it the Electrification Coalition?
Yes.
And so that will get, basically, it's a group buy program for local governments to reduce the cost on electric vehicles. So that is one of the solutions that we're promoting. Okay, let's see. Linda asks, what's the closest state to Florida where companies will target EV sales?
The ZEV states in New England. So Maryland.
Okay. Jody asked, will there be a community area to share ideas, suggestions, feedback, like a Facebook group? Jody, we're just launching this campaign. And so I think that's a great idea. And we should think about doing something like that. We don't have anything like that established right now, but that's a good idea to keep in mind as we kind of build the group of supporters and volunteers. Thank you. Susan says, great idea, Simon, about the Ducks and Trout Unlimited. South Florida Wildlands would also be a good organization to add to the list of wildlife organizations. Okay, so that's the last of our questions. Are there any other questions that people have? Feel free to type them in. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. In the meantime, any parting thoughts or ideas, Deirdre or Dory?
Just want to say thanks to everybody for getting on the call. We're really excited to get working with you in your local communities and building out EV infrastructure.
And take the nextcarpledge.org, which just says you'll pledge to research and find out more, and encourage your close friends to do it and ask them if they'll commit to test driving an EV. It's an easy ask and it gets people thinking. So thanks for being on this morning. You guys are the future.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Deirdre, also for joining and giving your inspirational words, and Dory. I'll reiterate that we recorded this webinar, so it will be available. We'll put it on our YouTube channel, and you can share it with your friends and networks to help spread the word. So that'd be a great thing to share, in addition to the blog post that Dory mentioned about this campaign. And yeah, just want to say thanks. Also make an invitation to you, if you enjoyed this presentation, to consider joining SACE so we can continue to work towards clean energy solutions in the Southeast. You can visit cleanenergy.org for info on how to join and become involved. Thank you all. Bye.